everyone. Welcome to week 11. Yes, it is week 11, and we are rapidly closing in on the end of a very busy semester. So I hope everything is going well. I hope you are hard at work on your Lit Review project number 3, as I'm giving you ample time to work on that, because I do want you to knock your Lit Review out of the park. And I'm going to switch gears a little bit today. I initially had said that I wanted to keep going down the route of statistics, but from all of the presentations that we have been conducting so far, it sounds like everyone is familiar with the statistics that are being used in the papers. This is not a statistic course, as I mentioned before. I'm just trying to kind of keep you guys aware of what stats might be employed or used in the papers that you're reading, but I'm getting a sense that everyone's kind of on top of that. But what I am worried about is some of the papers that we've been choosing and selecting to present on, because many of the findings were a little bit disturbing, perhaps a little unuseful, perhaps a little dishonest because of the manipulation of the statistics. So I thought I would go back a little bit and talk about different types of study design, because I didn't do that. I assumed that we all knew that, and I assumed that we all kind of knew about controls in experimental research. But based upon some of the lectures, some of the papers I've seen, I just want to make sure that we do touch on this and we understand what kind of studies we are reading and how they're organized. So we are going to talk about types of study design and methods of control in experimental research. We're going to kind of rewind a little bit and go back to some more simple topics. And what we're going to talk about today is basically study designs. In my textbook that I have here that I've been using, I'm in chapter 3 right now, so I'm kind of going back to the beginning. We're talking about the importance of study design, and study design tells us a lot about the data. It tells us a lot about the validity, and if study designs are put together poorly, you're going to find certain papers in really poor journals that have very little impact factor. So I do want to make sure we are picking better studies based upon the designs and the statistics, and we're kind of seeing through some of the holes and the gaps that are in some of these studies. Now, that takes a really long time to develop that skill, so I don't expect people to be able to look at a study right now and be like, oh, that's garbage. You will develop that over time, and you will be able to ask more critical questions about the papers you're reading as you get better at this process. So what we're going to talk about today are 3 different types of design, which is pre-experimental, true experimental, and quasi-experimental. Now, researchers and statisticians who basically define these types of things make it very convoluted and very hard to understand. So I'm going to do my best to simplify these 3 study designs, give you lots of examples, as you know I like to do, and hopefully we can walk away from this lecture understanding what designs were used in these papers, which ones we kind of want to avoid, and be able to look at the controls that they use and say, okay, well, this was not a strongly controlled study, and the study design was kind of poor as well. So I think if we highlight some of these study designs and I give you examples, I think that will help you along the way. And again, I apologize I didn't do this sooner. I just kind of assumed that because of where we were in our academic career, we might have a better understanding of these. But we all know what assuming does. And I'm referring to making an ass out of me, because I did not really ask you guys if you knew about this. So let's dive into it. But before we dive into it, I want to give you guys a little bit of some annotations. So I'm going to give you guys some examples that I'm going to put next to the text in my slides that are these annotations that I want you to kind of be aware of. So when you see O, that means observation or some sort of data that was collected. So for example, there's a lot of research designs where we will do a baseline measurement, which would be an observation, right? We're getting data. And well, here, let me use this pen. let me just get this going here. So it will do a baseline measurement, right? So this O would be our first observation. And then we'll just call this baseline, right? Generally, most strong research has a baseline measurement, especially if you're comparing changes within a group, because you want to get a baseline measurement and a post-intervention measurement to see if the intervention actually works. So then we can reject our null hypothesis. So when you see the letter X, well, that means that some sort of intervention or treatment or services were provided. Intervention could be for those of you that are in the psychology world. Treatment could be for those of you that are in the diabetes world or in the physical therapy world, or services could also be people who are also in the psychology world, right? So you could provide family services to see if that somehow changes self-esteem values. And then you'll see something called R, which means randomly assigned. Usually research that has random assignment is really, really strong. Research that does not have random assignment is not as strong. But what you'll see is some sort of measurement, right, followed by an intervention or a treatment or a service. And then generally, what do we see? Well, we see another observation, which would be post-intervention data. So I'm just going to write post, right? So that's what this kind of means. And I'm going to use these annotations to kind of put in front of you during our slides, right? And with the intervention, we're seeing, was there an effect of the treatment? Did this work and change baseline measurements? So let me give you guys a quick example here. So if I see X and O, well, if we look at it from this way, this represents time. That means that one group, right? I'm sorry. Yes, one group, this is referring to one group because you only see one X and one O, received one treatment and one observation, right? So if you look at this, we just see treatment, observation. What does that mean? Well, that means there was no baseline measurement, right? So that's not really strong research, and there is research out there like that. So if we see time moving this way and all we see is an X and an O, well, that means that one group received one treatment and all we got was a post-intervention measurement, right? So that's not really strong because I don't know what happened beforehand. I don't know what values were beforehand. Now, if you look at this one here, this tells us that we're dealing with two groups because you can see two lines, line here, line here. This tells me that this group was randomly assigned. This tells me that the next group was randomly assigned. We can see that group 1 received treatment, group 2 did not receive treatment, and only one observation was made, which was post-intervention, right? So what does that mean? Well, that means there was no baseline measurement, right? We didn't get one for group 1. We didn't get one for group 2. We do know that the people inside of group 1 were randomly assigned, and the group inside of group, the people inside of group 2 were randomly assigned, but only one group got the treatment, and then we have post-treatment measurements, but we have nothing to compare them to, right? So there is weaker research out there like that, and we have to be aware that we are selecting stronger types of research papers. So let's talk about pre-experimental design first. So if we go back here, I told you that pre-experimental design, this is our first type of experimental design. And what is this? Well, pre-experimental designs are the simplest form of research. They often only involve a single group, and they look at changes after a treatment is applied. But one of the biggest things that hurts this type of research is there is never a control group. So we don't have a group to compare it to. So this is gone. So what would this look like? Well, this would look like this. We have one group. What did I say? I said we have one group. They receive a treatment, and then an observation is made, right? But we don't have that second group down here, so we don't have anything to compare it against. So this is often, this lacks control and it lacks comparison, and that's why this is really kind of a weaker study. And I'll show you an example of these in a moment. So pre-experimental designs, These lack random assignment and control groups. So with these type of designs, we will not see an R, right? And we will not see a control group. But there's 3 types of these. There is a one-shot case study, which we'll talk about. There's a one-group pre-test, post-test design. Okay, so what would that look like? Well, that would look like this. One group pre-test, we have an intervention, which is an X, and post-test, right? One group pre-test and post-test. If we look at a single one-shot case study, this is a single group exposed to a treatment measured after. So that would look like this. This one-shot case study would look like this. One group, one measurement post. That's an X and an O, sorry. And time's going this way, right? And the other one is a static group comparison. And this is 2 groups, which is great. Now we have 2 groups, one with a treatment and one without, but no random assignment. So out of these 3, this one is a little bit stronger than the others. And even though we don't have the random assignment, that's okay. We have 2 groups. We have a little more power in this study, right? So the limitations of this type of research is it can't establish causal relationships due to the lack of control. So if we don't have controls or control groups, we don't really have strong research here. So here are some examples, and I already kind of drew this for you and just beating a dead horse here. So if we look at the one-shot case study, this one's pretty weak. So one-shot case study involves observing a single group after they received a treatment or intervention. Okay, so this would be time. We have one group, we have a treatment, but we have an observation with no baseline measurements and no other group to compare it to. So the focus is on assessing the outcome at one point in time. I have an analogy here just in case you guys need that. Because, you know, some people, it just helps them out quite a bit reading analogies, but you don't have to read that if you are not interested in reading it. So let me look at, let's go to the next. So here, this is like a one-shot case study. You're only looking for results after an event without any prior data comparison. So you might be saying, well, when would I use that? Like, when would I actually use something like that? And I have a couple examples for you. I did some research and I tried to figure out when a research design like that would be used, because it's really not a strong research design. Now, in the next section here, we can see again, we're talking about pre-experimental designs. This is a one-group pre-test, post-test study design. So this one's a little stronger. And why? Well, because we have a pre and post. So we have baseline and we have post-intervention, as you can see here on the left-hand side. So a one-group pre-test, post-test design, this enhances the one-shot case study. And how it enhances it is it includes measurements taken before and after the intervention. So its components, it basically includes a pretest, where participants are assessed on a relative outcome measurement, or they're just assessed on some data. For example, if I want to see how a certain bolus of glucose impacts baseline measurements of blood levels, I would do a baseline measurement, and I would say, okay, well, I have this one group here. I have a baseline measurement of blood glucose, and they're at 70 milligrams per deciliter. And then I give that group a bolus of 300 milligrams of sugar. So I'll say, okay, the intervention is I want to see 300 milligrams. And I want to wait 2 hours for my post measurement to see if that glucose level dropped. And if it dropped back down to 70, well, then I can make the assumption that this group is very insulin sensitive, and there is no insulin resistance, and all of that sugar is being disposed after 2 hours. So I have my pre, my treatment, and my post. So this is a little bit stronger. But again, I'm not comparing it to anybody. I'm doing a within group measurement. Okay, but again, it's stronger than this one. And then we have our last one here, and this is, of course, the static group method. And the static group design, this involves 2 groups, one that receives an intervention and one that does not. So you can see here I have group 1, group 2, only this group has the intervention, this group does not have an intervention, and I am only doing baseline measurements. So, I'm sorry, post-intervention measurements. So in essence, this group is kind of acting like a control because they're not receiving treatments, but there is no baseline measurement. So I don't know what values were prior to this or prior to this. And why do they do this? Well, one of the reasons they do this is they're looking to see if this intervention, if things have changed naturally, or was the intervention doing something? So example here, I have this group that had no intervention. So does this intervention only impact this group? Or is there a change that's just happening naturally that basically impacts both of these groups? And like I said, I have plenty of examples here that I'm going to go over with you guys in a moment. So now you might be asking, okay, well, when would I use these type of pre-experimental designs? And I did some digging, and I found that when it comes to one-shot case studies, exercise psychologists are more likely to use these than our sports psychologists or our physical therapists that are in this class. And maybe you're already aware of this. And like I keep saying, we all come from different realms of science. And in my world with, the cellular stuff, this would never fly. It's uncontrolled. There's no comparison. We would get poor data. We wouldn't be able to publish it just because it's a very loose design. So why would an exercise psychologist work with this or use something like this? Well, if they're working with disabled children, they might use this case study to evaluate an immediate effect of a new adapted exercise program. So let's just say they just wanted to see if I had swimming, and if swimming altered emotional status of children. Right, so that would be a quick one-shot thing, right? By measuring the children's engagement or enjoyment after the program, they can gather preliminary insight about the program's impact. Okay, so when we talk about pre-study or pre-experimental designs, this is kind of like we're trying to figure out what our true study is going to be, right? So if we have an idea of what we want to do, well, we might start off with just a single group or a small population to say, okay, this is pre-experimental design. Does this thing impact this at all? Is there a change from baseline to post? And if there is, you might say, okay, well, now we need to do a bigger study. Or if I do have two groups and I give one group something, does it vastly change the outcomes, or does that outcome happen naturally? So we have these ways of kind of saying, okay, well, this is pre-experimental design. I'm going to run this and see if there's anything there. But the reason I'm showing you this is because some of the papers that we've been looking at have been using things like this, where there was no baseline, there was no control group. The interventions were skewed. So we didn't know if the outcome was based upon the intervention or if the outcome was happening naturally. So that's why I want to show you all this. When we come to physical therapists, they might use a one-group pre-test and post-test. They might be more likely to use that as a pre-experimental design. And you can see the rationale here. They might use this design to assess the effectiveness of a rehabilitation program on patients recovering from knee surgery. So if they measure knee function or pain levels before and after, which I've been using that analogy the entire semester, they can evaluate the effectiveness of a treatment. And then lastly, the sports psychologists in the class, they might use this static group or this static group comparison. So they might implement a static group comparison design by comparing two groups of athletes, right? So that would look like we have group 1 and we have group 2, right? You guys understand my annotations here. One group participating in new mental training program and the other not receiving anything. So then we would have this, we'd have nothing there, and then we would do our observations. And we would see if group 1, after the intervention, showed any significant differences than group 2. So those would be our examples of our pre-experimental procedures. So I have a couple of examples here for you, and I can read these to you. Let me see how many I have. Yeah, there are a couple here, so I will read them, and you can fast forward it if you would like to. So if we're looking at physical therapists, let's see how they might apply these different methods. So if I have physical therapists doing a one-group pre-test, post-test design, well, I just gave you an example of that. So think about if we're looking at a patient's range of motion in their knee before starting a new rehabilitation program. After 6 weeks of therapy, the therapist measures the range of motions to see if there has been any improvements. Okay, so again, we're doing a one-group pre-test, post-test, so that would look like observation, experiment, observation. Did the intervention here actually improve range of motion after 6 weeks? Okay. Now, what is the limitation of this? Well, we can observe these changes, but it's difficult to determine if these changes are solely due to therapy and other factors, such as natural recovery. So this is why we always want to have a control group, and some of the papers that we've been looking at haven't been doing a good job of that. Here's another example of a one-shot case study. So a therapist applies a specific treatment technique. Okay, so that would be our X, right? We have a treatment. Get that X there. And they were dealing with patients with chronic neck pain, and we're assessing their pain levels immediately after treatment. So what would that look like? Well, that would look like we would go boom, boom. So we would have treatment, assessment. Again, lack of control means that the therapist can't conclude that this is that the technique caused the improvement in this particular type of study. And then I got one more for you here. So if we did a static group comparison, we would say that a physical therapist has two groups of patients with similar conditions. Okay, so let's look at this again. We got G1 and then we have G2. Makes sense, two groups. One group receives a traditional exercise program while the other receives a new exercise regime. Okay, well, in this one, we could say that Group 1 is getting the new one, and Group 2 is not getting the new one. They're just doing traditional exercise. So I'm just leaving that blank. Well, we'll see if Group 1 has improved outcomes versus Group 2. Okay? So this would be the new intervention because we're comparing exercise between the two of them. One of them is traditional, which means both of these groups could do this. But this group here is doing a new novel exercise, and we're going to see if those treatments change this in any capacity whatsoever. So let's go to exercise psychologists. I did not forget about you guys. So if we did a one group pre-post-test design, again, that looks like this. We have a single group baseline measurement, we have intervention, and we have post-measurement. We want to implement a physical activity program designed to improve social skills and physical fitness among disabled children. Before the program starts, the psychologist assesses children's baseline social skills. Boom, there we go. Makes total sense. And fitness levels using standardized assessments. After 8 weeks of participating in the program, the same assessments are conducted to see if the measurements have changed, to see if the measures had changed, right? Exercise, post, hopefully social skills got better. All right. Could be beating a dead horse here, but I just want to make sure we're applying all of these to our specific sciences. We have another one here, one-shot case study. Scenario, an exercise psychologist introduces a new adaptive sports program. We're calling it wheelchair basketball for disabled children in a community center. Okay, so again, this is a one-shot. So we're going to have boop, boop, intervention. In this case, it's going to be wheelchair basketball because we're doing this adaptive sport. And then we're going to have a post-intervention measurement. This is a one-shot case study. The psychologist measures the children's enjoyment and perceived benefits, such as increased confidence, immediately after a single session of the program and using surveys and interviews. Okay, so in this case, they're looking to see how this new adaptive exercise impacted their enjoyment and their confidence. Okay, we have no baseline measurements. We have no comparison to other groups. We don't know, maybe they just woke up on the right side of the bed that day and they were in a great mood. We don't know. It's severely limited because we're just doing an intervention and a measurement. And then the last one for my exercise psychologists out there, we'll call this a static group comparison. So you know what we're going to have a group 1. We're going to have a group 2, right? We know one of them is going to receive an intervention or a new intervention. One of them is not going to receive an intervention. We're going to look at these post measurements here. So the psychologist compares 2 groups, right? So we have group 1, group 2. Here they are. Group 1 participates in a structured exercise program. So we'll call that the new intervention. There it is. There's the X. While the other one participates in unstructured playtime. Well, that's just kind of doing whatever they want to do, right? So I'm just going to say they have no... that was supposed to be like a Ghostbuster sign, right? Like that. That's what was supposed to be there. Okay, so they're going to do this intervention, and they're going to measure the outcomes. And what are the limitations here? Well, they were not randomly assigned. That's another major limitation because we know that these pre-experimental designs here, there's no random assignment, so we lose a little bit of strength with that. They were not randomly assigned, and the outcomes could be influenced by pre-existing differences. So that would be another possible thing. So maybe group 1 and group 2, since they weren't randomly assigned, we just got a whole bunch of kids in this group that turned out to have a higher emotional being that day than this group, right? So this group had just more kids that were in a great mood. They were in a better place. This group did not. We didn't do any random assignments, so we didn't try to control for that. And then lastly, I got my sports psychologist here, so same sort of thing. Here's my 1 group pre-test, post-test. This is the stronger of the 3, right? So we have our baseline, our intervention, and our post. Sports psychologist wants to assess the impact of new anxiety management program on competitive performance among collegiate track athletes. Pre-test, the psychologist administers a performance anxiety questionnaire. Here we go. We have our baseline data. What were they at? And then, let's see, questionnaire and measurements of the athlete's race times. Intervention, the athlete participates in an 8-week anxiety management program. Here we go. Anxiety management program. There's our intervention. And then, of course, we will see if their performance improved because we knocked down that intervention. Another example would be the one-shot case study, right? So we know that is our intervention and our post-measurement. Where would you guys use this? A sports psychologist introduced a new mindfulness-based intervention. There it is. There's our intervention. Who did the psychologist introduce that to? Oh, youth soccer players, okay, who experience high levels of stress during tournaments. So we know that those tournaments are very long and very stressful. The psychologist conducts a single session of mindfulness training immediately before the weekend tournament, okay? So we're just going to see if 1 dose of this mindfulness training will have any impact on that whatsoever. After the session, the psychologist surveys the players about their perceived stress levels and confidence going into the tournament. So we probably all know that 1 session or 1 single dose won't do that. You might have some people where it impacts them and it affects them favorably, but most people have anxiety that they carry with them about performance for many, many years. So 1 dose just might not be enough to counteract that. And there's another one here. I'll let you read it. At this point, it's all kind of turning out to be the same thing. So I'm just making sure everyone understands what these pre-experimental designs are. All right, so now we're going to talk about true experimental design, and you should all be very familiar with this, as this is what I've been trying to push during the semester. Many of you have, of course, picked up papers that work with this true experimental design methodology. So what is this? So true experimental designs, which are often considered the golden standard in research methodologies, which this is why I want to present this, because some of the stuff that we've presented in our videos and some of the stuff that we presented in our lit circles haven't been true experimental designs. So this type of design allows researchers to consider or to establish cause and effect relationships, and that's why we do research. But most importantly, it allows us to establish this cause and effect relationship between variables through systematic manipulation and control, right? That is something that the pre-experimental designs did not have. We did not have this systematic manipulation and control. So this type of design is characterized by random assignment of participants, which is very, very important, to different conditions. And this enables researchers to control for potential confounding variables that could impact the results. So we did talk about confounding variables. And I would like to see more of these papers in our presentations and during our lit reviews. I know that 70% of us have presented true experimental designs, but there were a couple of papers I had to stop the speakers on and be like, wait, is this preliminary data or is this legitimate research? Has this been peer reviewed? So this is, these are the questions that we have to ask. So you're all familiar with this. I have a couple of just examples here just to say, okay, this is kind of what we're looking for, right? So if I have a physical therapist, so I would say a physical therapist wants to determine whether a new strength training program is more effective than a standard rehabilitation program for improving knee function in patients recovering from ACL surgery. So what is this going to have that the others did not have? Well, it's going to have random assignment. So even though I'm talking about physical therapy right now, please pay attention because I'm not going to read this on every single one. One of the defining features of true experimental design is random assignment of participants to treatment and control groups. So this ensures us that each participant has an equal chance of being assessed to any group, which helps to eliminate selection bias, and this also enhances the internal validity of the study. So we want to make sure that patients who are being randomly assigned, first of all, they meet specific criteria. So on some of the papers that have been presented, inclusion or exclusion criteria really wasn't mentioned a lot. So, if I have participants, I want to make sure they reach specific criteria. I want to make sure they're all within the same age. Maybe they have the same type of surgery and they're randomly assigned to an experimental group. And in this case, that experimental group is going to be what? The new strength training program, and a control group. And this is the people who are just getting the standard rehabilitation. So if we wanted to think about this pretest, we want to get this baseline measurement, right? Before starting the intervention, both groups undergo baseline measurement. So that would look like this. Group 1, Group 2. We know that Group 1 is randomly assigned. Group 2 is randomly assigned. Baseline was taken, right? That makes sense. Here's time, right? We know that one of them is going to get the intervention, which is this new strength training program, and the other one is going to get this standard rehabilitation program. And then we're going to do a post observation to get data to compare to baseline data, which basically we're saying, hey, did things change? Did this work better than this? Right? We know we're going to put both of them through 8 weeks of this intervention. So this intervention between strength training and standard rehabilitation is going to be 8 weeks. That's a pretty good time. And post-test is there. And then we're going to analyze this. Did this work? Did we have an increase in knee function? So if I look at my sports psychologist, if we want to determine whether a new mental resilience training improves performance anxiety and competition outcomes in collegiate swimmers, well, first thing we're going to do is get a bunch of swimmers. We're going to want to randomly assign them. We're going to want to make sure, we're going to have inclusion and exclusion control. Who do we want in there? Do we want first string swimmers, second string swimmers? Do we want divers in there? Do we want a mixed group of male and female? Do we want all female? Do we want all male, right? These are really, really important questions that we have to ask. We're going to have an experimental group and a control group, but we got to make sure that we control these groups, right? So the experimental group is going to participate in a new mental resilience training program. The control group receives no mental training program, okay? So I have randomized control, R, okay? I have baseline measurements, O, right? Here's the pretest before intervention. Both groups have to do a complete assessment, measuring performance anxiety. So here's that measurement, here's that measurement. I put one of them through this new experiment, right? That's the intervention, this new mental resilience training. And the other group gets 0 training, right? I'm just gonna, here's my Ghostbuster sign again. Okay, I did it. And then I'm gonna measure again, right? So we have much more strength, much more power. We have randomization. We have control of groups. We did experimental controls prior. And if you don't know what those are, I'm going to talk about those in a lot more detail in a little bit. And then we basically saw that, hey, something changed or nothing changed, but it wasn't based on chance because we provided all of this control to make sure it wasn't chance. And then last one here I have for my exercise psychologist. An exercise psychologist aims to determine whether adaptive exercise program improves physical fitness levels and self-esteem in children with disabilities. Well, what makes this so interesting is I have this new independent variable, and that independent variable is going to look at, does it improve physical fitness and self-esteem? So now I have two dependent variables, right? They're dependent on this adaptive exercise, right? I have one independent and two independent. And that is something that we did not see. Where's those slides at? Let me go back real quick. That's something that we did not see here. We didn't see 2 or 3 or multiple dependent variables, right? It's very simple, very short, not very controlled. But here we see one independent variable, two dependent variables, two groups. One group is experimental, one group is controlled. Both of them are randomly assigned. So now what we're doing is we're getting rid of any probability that chance is playing a factor here in our results, okay? So same thing. I have my randomized control, right? I just randomize people into different groups. On top of that, I'm going to set controls, right? So I'm adding this new now. What can that control be? Well, if I'm dealing with children, they have to be within the ages of 8 and 10. That would be a control, right? They weren't allowed to have any chocolate the morning of the assessment. Why not? Because chocolate has caffeine in it, and that caffeine could play a role in how they feel about their self-esteem, or how they feel about, or how well they perform in physical fitness. They can't have any injuries, right? Because that would impact, I'm just going to put INJ, that would impact our physical performance. So I can put all of these controls in here. They can't be on any medication. They can't be on any mood-altering medication, right? We can put all these different controls in here. We can randomize them. We could set controls for inclusion and exclusion, right? We'll do a baseline measurement, intervention, no intervention, post-measurement. And now what we've done is we created a study here where we are not going to get any interference of chance intervening with our research. Okay, and the last one we're going to talk about here is a quasi-experimental design. I have an analogy here if you need the quasi-experimental design, but what is it? This is a design that involves manipulation of an independent variable, but it's without randomizing. We will not randomize our groups due to ethical, so we're not going to get rid of this randomization. It's not happening due to ethical or feasibility issues where somebody could be put in a line of being harmed because of our research. So we will put them in groups, but it won't be randomized because we could potentially cause harm to an individual if we put them in a group that induces some unfavorable response or reaction. So we will have 2 groups, but no randomization. And there will be repeated measures taken before and after, but we will not randomize it. So why won't we randomize it? Well, here's a couple of examples. Let's say we have an education intervention, and we want to see how basically a new teaching method might help students' performances. Well, let's say we have a group of students who are, let's say they're in remedial courses, right? Or they're in some sort of adapted education. And then we have just normal students, right? And let's say we want to see if this new teaching method increases scores in both groups. Well, this new teaching method, is this new teaching method more for students who are normally function students? Are they going to get a better experience out of that? Or maybe the people in the remedial, maybe that's more directed towards them. Well, I can't randomize these because I won't be able to figure out what the effect of the new program is between remedial and normal education. So I have to keep them in their groups. So I'd say remedial versus normal learners. And I would have to see how this treatment maybe impacts this group, and then get the information there, get my observations there. The key point I'm trying to make here is I don't want to have any disruption of learning because I'm applying or I'm randomizing groups of different populations that may not belong together. Same thing can be true here if I'm looking at if you're a healthcare worker and we're looking to see how the impact of lifestyle intervention is on patient outcomes. And we want to look at the effects of a new diet on diabetes management. Well, there's a lot of research out there right now that says, hey, diabetics should be eating high-fat, high-protein diets to neutralize blood glucose levels. And, that might be good for bringing down chronically elevated blood glucose levels. But I would have to keep my diabetics within a group of other diabetics. Because if I compare them to lean, healthy individuals, I'm just going to put LH, right? If I compare them to lean, healthy individuals, well, if I'm giving them a high-fat, high-protein diet and it's bringing down blood sugar, well, a high-fat, high-protein diet might have way different outcomes on a lean, healthy individual who does not have metabolic abnormalities. So I can't randomly assign them to groups because that diet might be harmful to these people, but helpful to these people. So ethically, I can't say, okay, I'm going to give these individuals a really bad diet, high protein, high fat, chronic high protein, high fat, and basically induce them into diabetes because of that diet. So these are just examples to kind of show you that, oh, that makes sense. I can't randomize these individuals together. If I'm looking at harmful substances and I have a group of individuals who are exposed to very high levels of lead, well, I would keep my lead group together and I would keep my non-lead group together, because if I were looking at treatments or I was looking at what maybe smaller doses of lead does to the physiology within these individuals, I can't randomize them and mix them together, because if I'm dealing with any sort of lead, I got to keep my non-lead group away from it, right? I can't have them interacting with any sort of treatments or interventions or any type of things that might hurt them in the study. One of the groups that does a lot of this is your pharmaceutical companies. If you're looking at the effectiveness of certain vulnerable populations, well, let's say I'm in the world of pharmacy and I am looking at people who have advanced cancer, and I want a control group who are people that do not have cancer. So I'm going to say NC, no cancer. Oh my God, that's awful. I'm going to say NC, no cancer. Well, if I'm looking at giving a new drug that is going to potentially reduce cancer levels, I can't randomize these two groups of individuals because I have no idea what that new drug is going to do to my individuals with no cancer. So that's just kind of giving you a basic idea of why we would not want to randomize in certain situations. So as I always do, I have a couple of examples here for you that you can read on your own leisure. Here's for my physical therapist talking about this quasi method. Here is for my sports psychologist talking about this quasi method. And this is for my exercise psychologist. And basically what all these say are you cannot randomly assign students due to conflicts, or you cannot randomly assign patients due to conflicts, or you cannot randomly assign patients due to ethical concerns. So that's all this is saying. And you can read through this on your own because I've been talking for quite a while now. So here's just a side-by-side comparison of this. And I also went one step farther and I showed you how these things look side by side when we're looking at pre-experimental, true experimental, quasi-experimental. You can see definitions, what they are. Types, talked about that. Strengths, weaknesses, talked about that quite a bit. And then here are some of the ways we, we would use, if I'm looking at pre-experimental data, when will we use this? Well, for pilot studies, for initial exploration effects, right? So that's what I've said earlier. And my fear is that some of you have been presenting pre-experimental designs during your presentations and that you're taking that into your lit review. We need to take this and this into our lit review. And yeah, that's it. So you guys can look at this. I just created a table. You guys can look at these individual quasi research designs here. And that is all I have for you. And I will be back very soon when we're talking about controls and how important controls are in this entire process.